Welcome to the deep dive. We always appreciate you trusting us with your sources.
Absolutely. And, we don't just skim the surface here.
Nope, we go deep.
We'll pull out all that essential knowledge and insights for you.
Exactly. Saving you so much time.
And really making sure you're in the know.
Today we're diving into something really fascinating.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one. We're looking at how Nepal handles disasters.
Oh yeah, Nepal.
A country that's seriously vulnerable to all sorts of disasters, both natural and, well, not so natural.
Right.
And you were smart enough to send us these two crucial documents.
Yeah, the Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act 2074.
That's the first one.
And the Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Rules 2076.
Which came out in 2019.
Okay, so what are these exactly?
Think of these as Nepal's master plan.
Their playbook for dealing with the worst.
Yeah, how they prepare for disasters.
How they respond when disaster strikes.
And how they get back on their feet afterwards, the whole recovery process.
Now, some of you might be thinking, okay, Nepal, interesting, but what's that got to do with me?
Right, that's fair.
But here's the thing.
This is where it gets really cool.
When you look at how a nation builds its resilience.
Yeah, how they structure everything.
From the top levels of government.
Down to local communities.
And how they actually get everyone involved.
And the legal frameworks, right.
The laws and rules they create for when a crisis hits.
That offers some really valuable lessons.
Huge lessons, honestly.
No matter where you are, what you do.
It's applicable everywhere.
We're talking serious aha moments here.
As we break down these documents.
You'll be surprised at the level of detail.
It's fascinating.
So our mission today,
crystal clear.
We're going to understand how Nepal has organized itself.
We're looking at those core structures.
Who's responsible for what?
Exactly. And those step-by-step processes.
All laid out in these documents.
To tackle disaster risk.
So, ready to dive in?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's start with the basics.
The foundation.
When they talk about a disaster.
Right. Disaster. It's more than just a word.
What are they actually talking about?
Okay, so the Act gives a very precise definition.
Okay, hit us with it.
A disaster is a natural or non-natural event creating a threatening situation.
Okay, so far so good.
Leading to loss of life, loss of property.
The serious stuff.
And it has major impacts on people's livelihoods, on the environment.
It's that big picture impact.
Right. It's not just a small, localized event.
So, to sum it up for our listeners.
Nepal has a broad definition of disaster.
Covering a whole range of potential problems.
And that sets the stage for how they approach managing it all.
And then they break it down even further.
They get into the specifics.
Natural disaster.
One category.
Non-natural disaster.
Another category.
And that list of natural disasters is incredibly detailed.
They really thought of everything.
You've got the obvious ones.
Earthquakes, floods.
But then it gets really interesting.
Snowfall, avalanches.
Avalanches. Wow.
Glacial lake outburst floods.
Okay, now those sound terrifying.
They are a big deal, especially in mountainous regions.
And they even include drought.
And low rainfall.
So it's not just too much of something.
It's the extremes, both ways.
They've really covered the full spectrum of environmental threats.
That level of specificity is important.
It shows they're thinking about the nuances.
Right, it's not just flood.
It's inundation, too.
Different ways water can become a problem.
Fascinating. Okay, what about those non-natural disasters?
This list is just as comprehensive.
Give us some highlights.
Epidemics, famine.
Okay, those are major.
All kinds of accidents. Aviation, road, industrial.
Those man-made disasters.
Tires, leaks.
Leaks of what?
Toxic chemicals, radiation.
And scary stuff.
Even environmental pollution, deforestation.
Things we don't always think of as immediate disasters.
But they can have long-term devastating impacts.
They've really thought about threats beyond just natural forces.
Absolutely. And there's one more on that list that's really striking.
What's that?
Accidents during disaster rescue.
Oh, wow.
It's a reminder that even in the midst of a crisis,
there are still dangers.
Especially for those on the front lines.
The first responders.
Yeah.
Okay, so they've defined the problem broadly.
Now what's the solution?
How does Nepal actually organize itself to manage all these potential disasters?
They have a very structured approach.
It's a system.
A three-tiered governance system.
Okay, break that down for us.
At the very top, you have the National Council for Disaster Risk Reduction and Management.
The big boss.
The ultimate decision-making body.
And who chairs this council?
The Prime Minister himself.
So this is serious business.
It is. And their job.
Lay down the national policies,
The programs.
the big picture stuff.
Provide overall direction, make sure everyone's on the same page.
And they even evaluate how well disaster management is working across the entire country.
They have that oversight role as well.
Now, the makeup of this council is really interesting.
It's not just a bunch of politicians,
You've got key government ministers, obviously.
but also the leader of the opposition.
So both sides of the aisle are involved.
It signals that this is an issue that transcends political divides.
Right. Everyone needs to work together on this.
You also have the chief ministers from all the provinces,
Bringing in that regional perspective.
and, importantly, experts in disaster management.
People who really know what they're talking
The
about.
technical specialists.
And they're required to meet at least twice a year.
Keeping this top of mind.
Showing a real commitment.
Absolutely. So that's the top level.
The National Council.
Now let's move down a tier.
Okay, what's next?
We have the executive committee.
The doers.
These are the folks who translate those big policies into action.
The implementers.
Exactly.
And who leads this committee?
The Minister for Home Affairs.
So still a high-level government figure.
But the membership of this committee is really broad.
Diverse.
It's not just government officials.
Who else is involved?
Well, you've got the secretaries from all the key ministries.
Okay, that makes sense.
The heads of the security agencies.
The police, the army, that sort of thing.
Right. But here's what's really fascinating for our listeners.
I'm intrigued.
They also include representatives from some crucial non-governmental sectors.
So it's not just a government show.
Not at all.
Give us some examples.
You have someone from Nepal Rashtra Bank, their central bank.
Wow, the financial folks?
Someone from the Nepal Telecommunications Authority.
Communications essential during a crisis.
The Social Welfare Council.
The social safety net folks.
And big business and humanitarian organizations.
Haiku.
The Chamber of Commerce.
Okay, representing the business community.
The Federation of Nepalese Chambers of Commerce and Industries, FNCCI.
Another powerful business group.
And the Nepal Red Cross Society.
Of course, the humanitarian experts.
They're all at the table.
That is a really diverse group of people.
It shows that disaster management is everyone's business.
Not just the government's problem to solve.
Right. It requires collaboration.
A whole-of-society approach.
Now, what does this executive committee actually do?
They're busy, I bet.
They are. First, they draft the national policy and plans.
Those go to the National Council for approval, right?
Exactly. But they also have the power to approve those integrated and sectoral plans.
For reducing risk, responding to disasters, and managing recovery.
All of that.
The whole cycle.
And very importantly, they make sure those plans are actually put into action.
No point in having a plan if it just sits on a shelf.
Right. They're responsible for implementation.
So what are some of their specific responsibilities?
They develop early warning systems.
Those are crucial for saving lives.
They coordinate relief operations.
Getting help to those who need it most.
They raise public awareness about disaster risk.
Educating people.
And they even work to integrate disaster preparedness into the education system.
Starting on.
So it's a very broad mandate.
Okay, so we've got the National Council, the Executive Committee.
And now we come to the third tier.
The operational level.
The National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authority.
Say that 3 times fast.
Yeah, it's a mouthful.
What does this authority actually do?
Well, they operate under the Ministry of Home Affairs.
So still within the government structure.
And they act as the secretariat for both the council and the executive committee.
The administrative backbone.
Exactly. Think of them as the team that keeps everything running smoothly.
The organizers.
They're also the main resource agency.
Providing support to the other levels.
And they're led by a chief executive.
Appointed by the government.
Right. So they have a lot of power and responsibility.
What are some of their key functions?
They make sure that all those plans and decisions from the council and the executive committee are actually carried out.
They're the follow-through.
They provide financial and technical support to the provinces and local levels.
Making sure everyone has the resources they need.
They work with NGOs and the private sector.
That collaborative approach again.
They coordinate search and rescue efforts.
That's crucial in the immediate aftermath of a disaster.
They manage any international aid that comes in.
Channeling those resources effectively.
And very importantly, they run the National Emergency Operations Center.
The nerve center during a crisis.
Exactly. That's where all the information comes in, and that's where decisions are made.
It sounds like a really critical role.
It is.
And there's also mention of an expert committee.
Ah, yes. The brains of the operation.
What do they do?
This committee can be formed by the ministry.
As needed.
And they bring in specialists from all sorts of fields.
Like what?
Geology, medicine, Disaster management itself, environmental science, infrastructure.
People who really understand the technical aspects of disaster risk
Right. And their role is to advise on policy.
to provide that expert input,
And they conduct studies and research.
to better understand and prepare for disasters.
So they're the knowledge base,
So that's the national picture.
the top-down view.
But Nepal also has a decentralized system, right?
Very much so.
Disaster management doesn't just happen at the national level.
It needs to be grounded in the realities on the ground.
So how does it work at the provincial, district, and local levels?
This is where that three-tiered system really comes into play.
Okay, let's break it down.
At the provincial level, you have provincial disaster management committees.
Mirroring the national structure.
Exactly.
And who heads these committees?
Usually the interior minister at the provincial level.
So a senior figure within the provincial government,
Right. And their responsibilities are similar to the national level.
but focused on their specific province,
Right. They put those provincial policies into action.
adapting them to local needs,
They coordinate efforts at the local level within the province.
making sure everyone's working together,
They manage relief distribution within their boundaries.
getting help where it's needed.
And they develop their own provincial information systems.
So they have a degree of autonomy.
Yes, they're empowered to act.
Okay, so that's the provincial level.
Now, moving down to the districts,
Far granular.
we have district disaster management committees.
Okay, who's in charge at that level?
The chief district officer chairs these committees.
So a very important local official.
Absolutely.
What are their main responsibilities?
Well, they support those policies coming from the higher levels.
The national and provincial directives,
Right. But they also create the district's own disaster response plan.
tailored to their specific needs and vulnerabilities.
Exactly. And they're on the ground doing the hard work.
Coordinating local search and rescue operations,
Distributing relief according to those national standards.
making sure help is given fairly.
And working closely with local governments and NGOs.
Again, that collaborative approach.
Now, the membership of these district committees is really diverse.
It sounds like they're trying to involve everyone.
They are. You have representatives from local government bodies, of course.
The elected officials,
People from the health and infrastructure offices.
essential services,
Representatives from the security agencies at the district level.
maintaining that link with the national level,
Even representatives from recognized political parties at the district level.
keeping it nonpartisan.
The Red Cross, the NGO Federation,
The humanitarian and civil society groups
Sure.
to keep the public informed,
and the local Chamber of Commerce.
bringing in the business perspective.
It's a really broad cross-section of the community.
And finally, we get down to the most local level,
The grassroots.
those village bodies and municipalities,
That's where the rubber meets the road.
where preparedness really matters.
They have local disaster management committees.
Okay, who chairs those?
The chairperson of the village body or the mayor of the municipality.
The local leaders.
Right. And their role is absolutely crucial.
Why is that?
They develop those local disaster plans.
Tailored to their communities,
They allocate local budgets for disaster management.
putting their money where their mouth is.
They involve local organizations and volunteers in all the preparedness efforts.
Building that community resilience,
They make sure that building codes are being followed.
reducing risk at the source.
They conduct local emergency preparedness drills.
Practice makes perfect.
And they even establish their own local emergency operation centers.
So they're ready to respond immediately.
Exactly.
It's a system where responsibilities and actions are embedded at every level,
Top to bottom.
from the national policies to those individual communities.
That's how you build resilience.
Now, it's not just about those dedicated government structures.
Right, there's more to it.
These documents also outline roles for other organizations.
Entities that aren't directly part of the government.
Okay, like who?
Well, the security agencies, for example.
The Nepal Army, Nepal Police, Armed Police Force.
Exactly. They have very specific roles in disaster management.
What are they expected to do?
Well, they provide early warnings when possible.
Using their intelligence and resources.
They mobilize immediately when a disaster strikes.
They're often the first on the scene.
They carry out search and rescue operations.
It's saving lives.
And they even conduct training programs.
To build capacity for disaster response.
Now, importantly, under the direction of the chief district officer, they have a lot of authority.
Like what?
They can access any location.
No restriction.
They can utilize any resources necessary for disaster response.
That's a lot of power.
It is, but it highlights the urgency of disaster situations.
When every minute counts.
Exactly.
Okay, what about other essential services?
The fire department, for instance, they have a clear duty to inform the local disaster management committee.
Immediately when a disaster occurs.
They're also required to follow the directions of the district and local committees.
For those emergency operations.
Search, rescue, relief, the whole package.
And they also have that right to enter premises, like the security agencies.
Yes, under the authority of the local disaster management committee.
When it's an emergency, those rules can be bent.
It's about saving lives, ultimately.
And it's not just government and emergency services that have responsibilities, right?
That's an important point.
Publicly owned companies, private businesses, they're all in the mix.
Absolutely.
What are their obligations?
Well, first of all, they have to implement disaster preparedness measures within their own operations.
Making sure their own house is in order?
Things like having safety equipment,
The basic.
clearly marked emergency exits,
So people know how to get out,
evacuation plans.
knowing what to do in a crisis,
They also have to support those broader relief efforts.
beyond their own walls,
They need to provide basic disaster management training to their employees.
so everyone knows what to do.
They need to keep essential resources on standby.
Just in case.
And they even have to make their facilities available for emergency use.
If they're directed to do so.
Now, here's a key point for your listeners.
Hit us with it.
They're required to develop their own disaster management plans.
Not just relying on the government.
And those plans have to be aligned with the government's overall policies.
So it's a coordinated effort.
They're weaving disaster preparedness into the fabric of every organization.
It's not just a government responsibility.
A shared responsibility
Everyone plays a part.
in preparing for and responding to disasters.
Okay, now let's talk about the financial side of things.
The money.
How is all this disaster management work funded?
Well, the Act establishes a central disaster management fund.
The pot of money.
And the money for this fund comes from a few different places.
Let's break it down.
First, you have allocations from the government's own budget.
Taxpayer money.
Then you have donations
From individuals and organizations.
and financial assistance from foreign governments and international organizations.
International aid.
Right. Now, this is really important for your listeners to understand.
Okay, what is it?
These funds are specifically for disaster management activities and providing relief.
They can't be used for anything else.
Not for the government's regular day-to-day operations.
It's a dedicated fund
And there are checks and balances.
to make sure the money is used properly.
The Ministry of Finance has to approve any foreign aid.
Oversight from the financial experts,
And the Auditor General conducts audits of the fund.
making sure everything is transparent and accountable. And this isn't just at the national level, right?
No, there are also funds at the lower levels.
The provinces, districts, and local levels.
They all have their own disaster management funds.
For resources are available where they're needed.
Exactly. It's about ensuring a timely and effective response at every level.
It's good to know that there's a system in place to fund all this important work.
Absolutely.
Now, let's face it, sometimes things go wrong.
Right. Human error.
Or people might act irresponsibly during a disaster.
Taking advantage of a bad situation.
Do these documents address that?
They do.
What happens when people break the rules?
There's a whole chapter outlining offenses and punishments.
The consequences of bad behavior.
And there are penalties for a whole range of actions.
Like what?
Negligence that leads to a disaster.
People not doing their jobs properly.
Spreading false alarms.
Causing panic and confusion.
Unauthorized collection or misuse of aid.
Stealing from those who need help.
Price gouging.
Profiteering from a crisis.
Creating artificial shortages.
Making a bad situation worse.
Obstructing disaster management efforts.
Getting in the way of those trying to help.
And simply refusing to comply with lawful orders.
Ignoring the authorities.
And the penalties can be serious.
What are we talking about here?
Significant fines.
Hitting them where it hurts.
Even imprisonment.
Losing your freedom.
It depends on the severity of the offense.
So there are real consequences.
And if someone's negligence actually results in loss of life or serious injury,
That's the worst case scenario.
the Act is very clear.
What does it say?
They can be prosecuted under other relevant laws.
In addition to the penalties in the Act.
It's about holding people accountable.
when their actions have devastating consequences.
It's about justice.
These legal deterrents are really important,
They promote responsible behavior
and they prevent people from taking advantage of vulnerable people.
during times of crisis.
It's about protecting those who need it most.
Exactly.
Now, there's also a section called miscellaneous provisions.
Right, the catch-all category.
What are some of the key things covered there?
This section deals with a lot of important but maybe less central aspects.
Okay, give us some examples.
Well, for one, the government can declare a disaster-threatening area,
When a crisis is imminent,
and once they make that declaration, they have a lot of power.
they can do what?
They can close down institutions.
Schools, businesses, that sort of thing.
Right, they can restrict people's movement.
Telling people to stay home, evacuate, that sort of thing.
Exactly. They can requisition private property,
For emergency use,
and they can deploy specialized response teams.
getting the right people to the right place.
And the Act lays out how to make and lift those declarations.
So there's a process.
It's not arbitrary.
Okay, what about international help?
Well, any foreign entities wanting to provide assistance after a disaster,
Coming into the country.
they have to get approval from the Nepalese government.
It's about maintaining sovereignty.
Exactly. And the Act also recognizes that Nepal might need international aid,
If their own resources aren't enough.
and they can request that help.
Humanitarian assistance, financial support.
Right. And they can also declare when that assistance is no longer needed,
So it's a balance.
welcoming help when they need it.
But maintaining control.
Now, when a disaster hits, time is of the essence.
Every second counts.
So there's a provision for speeding things up.
Cutting through the red tape.
They can immediately buy essential relief materials.
No waiting for bids or approvals.
And they can start construction work immediately,
For search and rescue, preventing further damage.
whatever is needed to respond quickly.
It's about getting things done.
And, of course, if they requisition someone's property or vehicle,
As the emergency response.
the Act lays out how those people will be compensated.
Making sure people are treated fairly.
Now, when it comes to distributing aid,
Getting help to those who need it.
there are minimum standards.
To ensure it's done equitably.
And those standards focus on vulnerable populations.
Who are they talking about?
Women, children, senior citizens, people with disabilities.
The people who are often hit hardest by disasters.
Exactly. And they also emphasize a coordinated approach,
So everyone's working together.
avoiding duplication, making sure aid reaches the right people.
Efficiency is key.
Now, here's something you might not think about.
Okay, tell me.
What happens if you lose important documents in a disaster?
Your passport, your ID, property deeds.
Everything gone.
That would be a nightmare.
The Act outlines a process for getting duplicate copies.
So you can prove who you are, what you own.
It's about helping people rebuild their lives.
Now, it's not all rules and regulations.
There's a positive side, too.
That's that?
They can recognize and reward people who make significant contributions to disaster management,
Giving people credit where credit is due.
encouraging people to go above and beyond.
That's a nice touch.
And finally, to ensure accountability.
Making sure everything is done properly.
There are annual reports at every level
Local, district, provincial, national.
detailing all the disaster management activity.
Transparency is key.
It is. So that's a pretty comprehensive overview.
It is. We've really gone deep on this one.
We have
So for our listeners, what are the key takeaways about Nepal's approach?
a few things really stand out.
Okay, I'm listening.
First, the sheer comprehensiveness.
They've thought of everything,
It covers multiple levels of
from
government.
top to bottom.
And they clearly define roles for a huge range of actors.
Everyone has a part to play.
Second, the emphasis on preparedness.
Not just reacting when something happens.
It's about planning ahead, training, public awareness.
Building that culture of preparedness.
And third, the legal framework.
The rules that underpin the whole system.
It provides structure, it ensures accountability,
Yeah,